Hey, coaches, are you aware of the invisible expectations you hold for your athletes? Like, do they really understand and agree the standards and expectations that you have together? In this episode of the Don't Tell Me, Show Me podcast, we help you eliminate the gray. If you want clarity in your athlete relationships, then you're in the right place. So let's get started. So, Mark, we touched on a key concept in one of our last episodes, eliminating the gray. And that sounds like an awesome theme that like we need to pick on that thread. I want to know more about that because I get it on the surface, but what does that actually mean? And I hear from so many coaches who struggle with clarity, struggle with like understanding and agreeing with their athletes exactly what good performance looks like or bad performance looks like. So what's your approach? Like if we dig under the hood of eliminate the gray, what do you start with?
So this applies to parenting, coach to coaches, manager to coaches to owner, corporate business, athlete to athlete, across the board. Even physio, interestingly, physio and SNC often have an issue as well with this, with the adherence to the protocols. So eliminating the grey it would be lovely if everyone could do it, but often we don't know how. So what we mean by that is when we think we've agreed something in our heads, and even if we've asked someone to repeat it, often we haven't put the level of clarity on what that would look and sound like, and where is the mark of expectation based on our present capability. So that's where I use what I call UAEs, which is what would unacceptable look like, sound like, relevant to the task or behavior. What would acceptable look like, which is something based on our capability we can nail every single time. That's important. An exceptional would be if everything connects, that's something we could get to. But if you could do exceptional every time, then your benchmarks are wrong.
Okay.
Because that then should be an acceptable, not an exceptional. So they are organic. They do adjust, and we review every many months or however long. We've recognised some would stay the same, but some would say, actually, now we've improved in this. Actually, let's reset our UAEs against our expectations.
Okay, give me a use case then.
So used case would be, let's look at a common challenge for coaches, effective communication on court, on pitch, wherever that may be.
Yeah, every coach wants better communication.
Yes.
Yeah.
So here we go. Let's take this one on. And you can take this and you can run with it after this recording if you're listening to this. Commit to it because it will be a game changer if you're not doing it. So we know the challenge with communication may be people are not communicating as in saying something, or they're not saying something of value, or they're not hearing it and understanding it, or that they're not acting on what they're hearing. So remember, effective communication is if it has the desired impact, not so much, well, I've said the right thing, I've done my job. So it's what impact it has. So if we look at setting UAEs against effective communication, and you can set your own up, this is an example. So first of all, unacceptable would be, I am venting, I'm not managing my state when I communicate with someone, and what I'm sharing is not solution-based. So what I'm sharing is the problem. I am not sharing a solution. That would be unacceptable. So there's two elements to that. So what I'm saying and how I'm saying it within unacceptable. Acceptable would be, in this same scenario, I still can't manage my state in a way to adjust my communication for individuals. I know it would land better in this situation, but I'm sharing a solution. So I'm not sharing a problem, I'm not venting, I'm sharing a solution based on our present capability. Remember, we spoke about capability combination, not just individual capability in episode 1. So now we're saying, look, we understand if you're under stress and you're fatigued or things may not be going well, you may not be able to, in the heat of the moment, adjust your style of communication for the individual. But we can still share solutions. So that would be acceptable. Exceptional would be, I can adjust how I'm communicating with each person to help it land as effectively as possible. And not just, that's not robotic, that's actually Jimmy now. I know Jimmy now is struggling because he disagreed with the foul that made us concede a score, and he's now in that state. So now what's the best way to communicate with him? Or it may be, actually, he's so focused on getting the job done right now, is hyper. He's not calm, he's not present. So how would I communicate with him now? That would be the exceptional in how, and the what would, I'm still sharing the solution. But on top of that, we have, and tell me if you want to park this and then add it later, Simon, is we set a framework of, if we're hearing information that's delivered to us, how we respond to that would also be in the acceptable and exceptional.
Yep.
So we've set a framework of what I'm sharing, as in saying, but also we need to share a framework, and I use the 3 A's of how I respond to information given to me in that heat of that moment.
Okay.
So that's a real example in first giving out, Simon, of using UAEs in communication.
Okay. I've got a concern about how the concept of UAEs could be implemented by a coach, but let me come back to that in just a sec. First, I scribbled down 3 A's. What are they?
So 3 A's would be, if I'm hearing, and there's a layer to this we may delve into. If I'm hearing information given to me about an action I need to adjust, solution-based, then internally I need to accept it and not push it off because it's not my best friend, or, they're a junior, whatever barriers I may have. Then the second is acknowledge it. So that's a thumb up or whatever physical word or physical movement we have said, that's me recognizing, and then act on it. So taking action on the word. So they are the 3 A's. Okay. So if I'm a coach, I'm looking from the sideline. I've seen the communication. The communication is correct based on our parameters. I'm looking for the response. As an athlete, if I'm giving the information to that player or players, I'm looking for the 3 A's myself. Are they going through those 3 A's? If I'm not seeing it, I follow through again. I don't just say, oh, that's my job. I've done my bit. That's on you now. That's how we communicate in following through, which is in the rule of 3, which we could talk about in another time. You can see how they all layer together. But in essence, using communication with the UAEs is making sure everyone understands the clarity of expectation based on our capability. And the capability is important because in that situation, there may be somebody that doesn't yet realize, they understand what someone needs to do if they're on the wing or movement in a zone, defense, whatever it may be. But someone potentially not as skilled as they need to be yet, they may not realize that that person they're giving that information to is not yet capable of applying it at that level, at this level of pressure, at this part of the game. So what they're sharing on paper may look good, but actually to be successful, that's not an effective communication because actually the person can't do it.
Yeah.
So this is a layering of, that's what we do in practice. We learn it in practice. We spot someone saying something, actually that's not correct, or the person's not capable of doing that. Okay, now I can put my interventions in to upskill the person sharing the information. And that's what we do in practice environments, software upskilling, to allow us to be effective under pressure in matches.
Yeah. Okay. So the 3 A's then is I'm hearing that as a tool that athletes can use, but then the skill of the coach is always present. So you recognize when the information that an athlete is sharing is just flat out wrong or doesn't fit the game plan or our style of play or whatever, then you've got a nice how to do. You've got this nice how framework, 3 A's, but the what somebody's actually saying is wrong. So I mean, then the framework is just, I mean, if anything, you could do damage by successfully implementing the wrong idea because of a skillful use of the 3 A's by the athletes. So the coach has always got to be present and scanning, I guess, to use some of your words, for what quality of information is being presented. Because I've had situations where I've gone through a phase of using player timeouts, and in practice, I said, okay, you got 30 seconds, whatever, debrief on what just happened, So we're in the middle of a scrimmage game in practice. Okay, player timeout, two groups get together, you got 30 seconds, discuss what's just happened and what you're going to do next. Sometimes even giving them a guide. So, okay, team A, I think you need to be talking about defense. Team B, you need to talk about offense, or I can be even more specific. And then I listen in, and it's one of the senior players just talking absolute dribble. Like, actually, it would have been better if I had just told them myself what was wrong, because, and he may be using great communication skills, but this is the kind of trick, like something like being player centered. It sounds great, but it's the execution that really matters. And if the players are talking absolute crap, then it backfires.
And there's an important point you've made there, Simon, is that when you say, I know you're saying it to prime me, good work. When you say, well, it would be easier for me to tell them, actually following a need-centered approach, I need to identify what they know and how they're communicating it. So by me stepping back and not telling them and seeing what they say allows me to understand there is a gap there in knowledge or understanding. Fantastic. Now I'm recognizing it. I can now put interventions in. Whereas if I told them, they'd be good at doing what they're told. But then in a match, when I'm pulling my hair out going, why on earth are they doing that? We've done it 100 times in practice. Well, they've done the application 100 times, but they haven't done the decision-making part, because I've always done that for them. So this is that point of, and I think this is where people trip up a little bit if we're just looking at the base of communication and the nuances with, I'm asking a player to give another player information. Well, what if they're not right, Mark? Says, well, that's what you need to find out in practice. That's what practice is for. So once we find out, we identify the source. Was it a scanning issue? Was it a match IQ issue of just understanding what the options are? Or was it the influencer issue of actually what are the influences that would impact the choice? Well, that player's capability would definitely be one. Have you ever seen that player execute what you're asking to execute at this level of pace at this time in a game? No. Okay, so we're now in a phase where we're exploring stuff we can't yet do, which is great if we are, but remind me what we agreed this phase is. It's performance coach. So in a performance phase where we're executing things we're capable of doing, was that the right call? No. So what would be the right call? This one. Great. Love that. Back in. So in that, and that's less than 60 seconds of a little hot one-to-one on the sideline with that particular player, we've understood, yes, their game IQ was good, their scanning was good, but their influencer was something that they didn't think of at the time, because actually the person normally on their right-hand side is another player who is capable of doing that, and they just didn't think to make those adaptations. So now I've raised the awareness of that athlete. Now I'm scanning for next opportunity when that comes round. Has there been that adaptation change? It has. Fantastic. So this is where that fits in well, and this is where we want athletes to communicate effectively and share data. We just need to make sure it's the right data at the right time, but importantly, not so specific where what does coach want me to do? Because we know there's nuances, isn't there? There could be 3 or 4 options in that moment. They're all acceptable. So the fact the athlete is thinking of one that's capable and going for it, and they can quantify that, is brilliant. So long as it's one of the ones that is not effective and does not fit our style of play or our capability.
Yeah, well, they might have made, let's say, the wrong choice or a different choice to what I would have made in that game scenario, but they committed to it fully. So is that acceptable or unacceptable?
Yeah, well, let's think about it. If we looked at that, if they made a choice that was different to one the coach is thinking is the right, but actually it was effective, then that's one to add. I mean, let's see if it wasn't a one-off. That's, let's test that back in practice wherever it may be. Let's use practice as a way to see if they can make choices based on what they see. But clearly, if it's not, then we can start looking at where the issue was. So did they commit? Yes. So let's celebrate that. How was the execution? Exceptional. Let's celebrate that. Okay, let's look at now it's either in the state, the scanning, the options, or the influencers. Let's find out which one of those it is. Now I can put in some support. And going back to the other element we were talking there, Simon, is we're also making sure that there may be an athlete who are athletes that we trust more within their knowledge of the game that can do that intervention that we're talking about that the coach may do. The player may do that on the court in those practice environments. That's where we build game like practice to explore these, where it's a player that's behind him or to the side says, hey, Jimmy, this was the right choice for that situation. So they're using effective communication to upskill the other player that's communicating with the other player. So this is that teamwork live, where we don't want to just stop as a timeout every time to have a discussion. Can we have that communication live, and we can have that clarity of, I'm sharing a solution, I'm looking for the reaction, great, yeah, I've got that, I'm looking for next time, brilliant, we're making the change.
Yeah, this is interesting. You hear some of that, some of the best comms in that regard that I hear sometimes is when you can get a rugby player, a really good rugby player who's mic'd up. I mean, some of their on-field comms is unreal. Or if you get sideline sometimes at a high-level rugby game, it's unreal, some of their comms. The kind of Bowden Barrett type players, these really experienced one, their on-field comms is something else. And they've got respect within the group. So, the acknowledgement and then the act that comes from their teammates is almost guaranteed. And then but prior to going out on the pitch, they've been empowered by the coach to act in that way, to give that sort of feedback, to communicate in that way to their teammates. Because
they've earned the right.
Yeah.
They've shown to the coach that they're capable of making these decisions, and they have in live play under pressure. So now the coach is given the permission to say, look, you can make all these choices. You don't have to look for the sideline. You can make all these choices. I mean, George Ford is a great example of when some people that don't know all the things that George is whispering in the ear to players and the decisions he's making, that's what he's doing all the time. And if someone misses a tackle, if you watch games, it will be George, if he's close, will be the one patting him on the shoulder and whispering that player's ear. So it's not just on execution of outcome. It's actually, how can I get that player back to being present, to being their best in that moment, being their excellence? And that's that nuance of communication. So we've now put a clarity of UAEs around what is effective communication in a simple framework. I think in itself, in my experience, that has shifted a lot of coaches and athletes when they've heard the difference between unacceptable is just venting, acceptable is sharing a solution. Immediately, that's quite a shift for a lot of players. I hadn't thought about it like that before. And then we can build, was it the right solution based on our capability combination, based on what we're seeing now? And we build on that.
Okay, let me describe, though, a scenario, because you're interlocking a lot of these concepts together. Obviously, quite rightly, we can't take any one of these concepts in isolation. So unacceptable communication would be venting, right, by an athlete. But I've got a player on my team who's valuable to the team. Like, they can really play, right? Their state, to borrow one of your terms again, their state during games is not always stable. So they vent a lot, but they use that as a way of getting back to stable. So they use it as a way to improving their state. So sometimes they just need to let something out, which under our UAEs of communication would be unacceptable. However, it's actually quite healthy for them. Well, it might not be healthy for their teammates or on the other end of that venting. So do I let that roll a little bit? Do I coach them in game, or do I coach them in between games and help them to become more aware of their state?
So I just want to throw a current in Formula One at the moment that's quite relevant, is Max Verstappen, who just had points demoted in the last race because things weren't going according to his expectation. One of the best drivers in the world, when things are going his way, when his expectation and it goes against him, he loses it. And he's been in fast cars in the last few years, so he hasn't had that issue. Last race, he had that issue, and he just drove straight into another driver on a corner, deliberately. So if you listen to commentators going, but that's part of Max. Max is one of the best in the world. That's part of Max. No. That is not Max performing well. That is Max losing his composure and doing crazy things. They're separate too. So if we relate that back to your situation, and there's no right and wrong to these, of course, I would first explore is what is causing his frustration. Is it on himself? setting high expectations or unfair expectations on his competency execution? Or is it he has unfair expectations of his teammates in certain situations? Because if I can understand that, then we can start saying, well, if we think about it now as a team performance, are you being negative selfish if it's expectations on others where actually it's not productive now because that player's never done that all the time in a match? And actually how you communicate with that athlete, you might go, well, that's just me. That's just you now. But if you want to be the best player you can be, here's your strengths. But this is something that could be in that moment, in that 5-second ripple of that player communicating, maybe pulling that player down. Or they may think, here we go again. So therefore, I'm not going to listen. I'm just going to blank that player out. And now we don't have effective communication.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, we can go down a rabbit hole here around kind of identity and self-worth, for athletes, because a lot of communication, particularly in game, is about deflecting mistakes that I see, or I made that mistake because of somebody that you did or somebody else did. And if you did your job better, then if you'd passed the ball to me here, right to my hands instead of here above my shoulder, I would have been in a more balanced position.
Let's look at that, Simon. So we can look, and this is where we need to put under pressure in practice. This is so important because then we can put interventions in. So one is raising their awareness to the productivity of how they communicate and their expectations to enhance the team, not pull it down. So once we've established, is that a me, as in my expectations, or is I'm asking things of athletes they're not capable of doing? So then we can look at, if someone's saying, oh, the pass went here and I missed the pass, that was a poor pass, it should have came here. Then we've got to be looking at, in the ideal world, did that player want to pass it here? Okay, so was it because actually you accelerated a bit early? So he saw you accelerate. I'm just looking at this as an example in rugby, for example.
Oh, no, it's a good example because it has to, rugby has to be at that. At the spit. It's incredible when you see it in person, how hard and fast they can throw a ball.
So if your timing of you starting your run of acceleration is slightly off from where they saw, and they've got someone coming at them as well, they may be popping under pressure that pass, and you're now accelerating a bit more than they thought. That pass is going to be behind you. Or it may be actually that their skill level, they're under that level of pressure when someone's coming at them that might be twice their size and it closing down fast. They're scanning that person, they're looking for you, they're identifying the option, and then they're learning it out. They're just not maybe skillful enough to get it in front of you every single time. Because I would argue, even if you watch Premiership elite rugby, pretty much every match someone's going to throw a pass that isn't in front, is behind, because of the variables of the pressure. So now we're thinking with a player that gets frustrated and go, look, if someone is just chilled and they're not under pressure and they just don't commit to a pass, then what we've got to be asking ourselves now is that acceptable based on our behaviors? No, you didn't commit. You didn't make a good choice. You kind of did it. Now you can go to that player and go, hey, next time commit. You're better than this. That is not a commit and pass. We commit every time. That's an intervention. That's not a vent, but that's direct feedback to that player, because that's unacceptable for us once we pre-agree it. If it's they've done the best they can, but actually they're at that level of skill where, it's just not going to be there, then I've got to go next time, but I'm not going to get frustrated with them. I can be frustrated and that I could have been on, and I can do a little swear vent, whatever I do, because I'm frustrated it could have been on. But then I go to them and go, that's not on you. You're doing the best you can with what you got. It's just next time. Don't go again. Don't not do that. Next time we've got this.
Process over outcome as well.
And the smarts of capability around us. Like, we've got to set fair expectations with our teammates and not. So, and this is the challenge with social media, and we see it in boxing, we see it in MMA, we see it in basketball, rugby, soccer, potentially one of the worst, is we see things happening in behaviors on the big screen with the top athletes. So we emulate that. So if we see a player swearing, shouting, being aggressive to the referee or another player, as a young kid, we may see that as acceptable within what great athletes do, because my hero does that, as opposed to, as a coach, raising awareness to what are the behaviors we want to emulate that we see in others, and what are the ones we could do better as than the others, and why, based on us. So again, that's another element back to the clarity of UAEs is we can set behavior around based on us and what type team do we want to be, what would be unacceptable within those moments. And then even when it's agreed and we've got clarity with those UAEs, what does that look and sound like? It may be on the pitch or court, can you just show us now? So we've got that clarity of meaning. That's a great way just to make sure everyone understands. But then it's just been relentless and patient. Or when we see it exceptional, we seize those judgment moments, next break in play. Hang on, guys, can you review what happened there? Because we need to reflect on that. What do we do differently there that made that so great? How did that fit with our UAEs around that? It was exceptional, coach. Yes. Why? What was different? So they're connecting. And then when it's unacceptable in those moments, we're back to remind me what we agreed. So what were the UAEs around this based on our capability now? So where is that unacceptable? Okay, what caused it? What do we need to change? Okay, is that something we can do right now? Yes, show me. We step back. So it's that patience. But once the clarity is there, we have, as opposed to us having to control it, we have a point of reference to ask them to review against based on their capability.
Yeah. Okay, I mentioned at the beginning that I had a concern. I haven't circled back around to that, and this could be a way to finish because I think we can come back to this theme of eliminating the grey. The concern I have is that in the wrong context or used slightly the wrong way, this concept of UAEs can be used by a coach to enforce their idea of what's acceptable and unacceptable, as opposed to what's been pre-agreed with an athlete. Because in many situations that prior step hasn't been done. So do I have to pre-agree what's acceptable and unacceptable in advance with the athlete before I can kind of use this language with them and hold them accountable? And if so, that's really hard to do across all of the on-court and off-court aspects we've got to do. And then where do you sit with the potential misuse of this UAE concept with regard to needs-based coaching? Because the risk, I wonder, is the coach takes this idea and becomes a little bit more coach-centric.
Well, let's flip that to say, irrelevant of what tools a coach may or may not use, if a coach is coach-led, coach-centric, they'll be dominating whatever.
Yeah, okay.
It's not the tool won't be the issue; it's the coach that's the issue.
But this tool could enable them to be coach-led even more. And
in my experience, it doesn't, because if a coach is like that, you'll rarely get them to use a UAE. They'll just be, it's my way. That's wrong. They don't need a UAE for that. Yeah. That's just what they do.
Yeah.
So breaking down your questions is, once we align the type team we want to become, which is that reference we started to talk about in the first episode. I called it the lighthouse, but other people can call it whatever. It's our point of reference for everything. We have to pre-agree, but we pre-agree on the fundamentals. So that what's the most important? And I'm a big believer in behaviors first. So the communication one is massive. We spoke about in the previous episode 1 of just what a warm-up looks like. When are we ready on the line? You know, what would be unacceptable there? Accelerating pass lines. What we're saying there is we don't have to go through everything we do in a warm-up, but just by saying we're ready mentally on the line and we're checking our teammates every single time. And when we're given a task of sprint past the line as an example of task, we commit to the whole task, not just decelerate to the line. But we don't have to go through every then activity in a warm-up or action. What we're saying is that is an attitude we do with every element. So now they understand the clarity of, yeah, I get that. You don't have to go, oh, what happens when he says squat thigh parallel? Well, we don't put UA goes, well, what do you do? I squat thigh. And what if he can't? Well, I need to understand how, and then I'll put an intervention of practice with my S&C to get there if it's something I need to do. Or you're one of the old players, you've got poor ankle flexion, or your ankles are taped up so much you can't bend forward. You let the guy know before the warm-up. Go, yeah, okay, no problem. You know, it's the clarity of capability. And so for me, if it's not pre-agreed, and sometimes there'll be something important that you miss, and then you're looking at it and you're thinking, Yeah, we haven't pre-agreed that. I can't have a go at anybody there, but I can have a discussion of reference. So then we see an activity. It's huge for us as a team and our culture, our performance in choice execution. So we just have that moment. We go, okay, I know we haven't agreed this, but there's something come up now that we definitely need to discuss and agree for future. So let's look at this. Based on where we need to go, what would be, what do we need to do? Why? Okay, so what would be unacceptable in this moment for us? What are we working to here? So we go, okay, we've now cleaned that up. And we do this a lot in business with people, with managers. They go, I'm getting annoyed now because they haven't done it this way. And they've set some UAEs up in basics. And I say to them, before you get annoyed, has it been clear on expectations? Or are these invisible expectations again in your head? And they go, yeah, invisible expectations. So, well, don't get annoyed, but let's put an intervention in. So we clear that up for next time. And over, doesn't take long, but over weeks, months, you start building the basics. And then the athletes, if there is grey, they'll ask and say, can I just get a bit of clarity on this, coach? What's the expectations here?
Yeah. Okay, Mark, we've double clicked on the theme of eliminate the grey. I'm looking at my scribbles here. We've covered UAEs. We've looked at the 3As. We've touched on clarity of capability. We've done a little bit on microcomms. I think in the future we could double click on this idea of state and how it affects your scan and then what options you see. I think we could double click on that going forward. So thanks again for another episode. We always want to keep these short and sharp. So I think we're about the half-hour mark, so people can crack on with their day, finish the dog walk or the trip to the gym, and we hope coaches benefited from this. So thanks for joining me.
And we'll deep dive a little more into the permissions and the what ifs on that as well, because I think that will be a good layer in our next flow. But I hope it was useful. If you've listened, take it, jot it down, and commit to it, and then give us your feedback. Let us know how you went with it.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Hey, coaches. I've just done a cold review of last episode. There's some great stuff in there. My notes have got eliminating the grey, UAEs, the 3As, lots of Mark's acronyms as always that you can just take with you and implement in your coaching straight away. So thanks for listening to the end. We really appreciate it. This is episode number 3, and we've already picked up quite a few subscribers. We've got quite a few views. We're not trying to set the world on fire to begin with, so we really appreciate the support that we've been receiving to date. So please feel free to get in touch with us as well. Just before you go, just a reminder, if you haven't heard already, we're bringing masterclasses to the UK and Ireland. So that's 4 one-day workshops spread out over the course of this year. We're looking at Edinburgh, Sheffield, Ireland, and somewhere down south. We're finalizing the dates at the moment. It's a full day with Mark Bennett and Alan Keane, diving into needs-based coaching, all the principles you hear on this podcast. How do you bring those to life, and what do they look like when they're actually in action? So you spend a morning with Mark going through a lot of the detail of his PDS system, the afternoon observing Alan working with athletes on the court or the pitch, bringing these kind of principles to life. So yeah, stay in touch, and thanks again. We'll see you soon.